We were celebrating our anniversary with family at a fancy restaurant in New York. When I went to the restroom, I noticed my husband take my wine glass and sprinkle something into it. When I returned, I decided to discreetly swap my glass with his sister's, the woman who had always hated and constantly insulted me. But just 30 minutes later, the first thing that hits you in a place like that isn't the view, though the view was breathtaking. It was the 10th anniversary of my wedding to Mark, and we were suspended 50 floors above Manhattan, looking down at Central Park as it glittered like a spilled tray of emeralds under the city lights. No, the first thing that hits you is the silence. It's not a true silence, of course. It's the low, confident hum of quiet money, the gentle clinking of heavy silver on fine china, the whisper of waiters in starched coats, the murmur of conversations that never get too loud. It's a silence that costs $1,000 a person, and it's meant to make you feel like you belong. For 10 years, I had been trying to feel like I belonged. Seated around the pristine white tablecloth with us were Mark's family. His father, Robert, a man whose tailored suit probably cost more than my car, gave the impression he was perpetually analyzing a stock ticker in his head. His mother, Carol, was all pearls and a tight Botoxed smile that never quite reached her eyes. And then there was Chloe, Mark's sister. A ruthless corporate lawyer with a tongue that could slice through steel, she was my own personal storm cloud, and she'd been following me since the day Mark put a ring on my finger. "To 10 years," Mark said, raising his glass of deep crimson liquid. He was so handsome it was almost unfair, with that perfect jawline and a smile that had once made my knees weak. Tonight, he was playing the part of the doting husband beautifully. And to my beautiful wife, Jessica, the best decade of my life. His parents offered a lukewarm "hear, hear," and raised their glasses an inch off the table. Chloe just smirked, her red lacquered nails tapping against the stem of her glass. 10 years, she mused, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. A silent, disapproving appraisal. It feels like only yesterday we were all so surprised. Mark, you always were one for a passion project. I felt the familiar heat creep up my neck. I was a high school art teacher from a solidly middle-class family in Queens. To them, I wasn't a passion project. I was a charity case Mark had picked up. "Leave it alone, Chloe," Mark said, but there was no real force behind it, just a practiced weariness. He squeezed my hand under the table. His palm was clammy. "Oh, I'm just admiring her," Chloe said, her smile widening. "It's so quaint. That you shape young minds for a living, Jessica. Truly, noble in its own little way. I just hope the school district provides a decent benefits package. It's a tough world out there." The dig was clear. My quaint salary was a drop in the ocean compared to their family's fortune. I forced a smile. "It's rewarding work. Not everything is about the bottom line." "Of course not, dear," Carol chimed in, patting my hand with fingers that felt like cold porcelain. "It's wonderful that you have a little hobby to keep you busy." I felt my stomach clench. A hobby. That's what they thought of my career, my passion. I looked at Mark, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to really defend me. He just gave me that placating smile again. "Honey, they don't mean anything by it." But they did. They always did. The last few months, the tension was even worse than usual. There had been hushed, frantic arguments late at night about our future, about some investments Mark had made that weren't performing as expected. He'd become secretive, his phone always angled away from me. Then, about 6 weeks ago, he'd come to me with a stack of papers and a disturbingly cheerful expression. "Hey babe," he'd said, "I was thinking, we need to be more responsible. I took out a great life insurance policy. On you." I'd stared at him, my blood running cold even then. A $5 million policy. "Isn't that a little much?" I'd asked, my voice barely a whisper. He'd laughed it off. "You're worth more than that to me. It's just smart planning. For our family. To protect us." But the way he said "protect us" felt all wrong. It felt predatory. The memory, combined with the suffocating atmosphere at the table, was making it hard to breathe. My head was pounding. "Excuse me," I mumbled, sliding my chair back. "I'll be right back." Chloe watched me go with a look of smug victory. Mark gave me a tender look. "Don't be long, honey. The main course will be here soon." I walked away from the table on unsteady legs, my heels sinking into the plush carpet. The ambient restaurant noise washed over me, a welcome relief from the focused hostility of my family. I just needed a minute to splash cold water on my face and put my mask of polite indifference back on. As I rounded a large ornate column, I glanced toward a decorative wall mirror, one of those antique-looking ones with beveled edges that distort the reflection just slightly. I intended to just check my makeup, but my eyes found our table in the glass. And then I saw it. Everything went silent, except for the roaring in my ears. The scene played out in the distorted mirror like a nightmare. Mark, my husband of 10 years, glanced quickly toward his parents, who were deep in conversation. He shot a look in the direction I had gone. Then, thinking he was unobserved, his movements became sharp and furtive. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, dark glass vial. His hand was steady. With a swift, practiced motion, he uncapped it, held it over my glass, the one with the expensive red beverage he had just toasted me with, and tipped it. A fine white powder, almost like salt, cascaded down into the dark liquid. He swirled the glass once, twice, setting it back down exactly where it had been. Then he pocketed the vial, and his face settled back into that same pleasant, handsome mask he always wore. My heart didn't just drop, it evaporated. I was frozen in place, my hand gripping the cold, gilded edge of the mirror. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of hurt feelings and petty resentments, went completely, terrifyingly blank. And in that blankness, one single, icicle-sharp thought formed. He was trying to kill me. The heavy, ornate door of the women's restroom clicked shut behind me, and the cacophony of the dining room, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of 100 conversations, was replaced by an unnerving, humming silence. I stumbled into the first available stall, my fingers fumbling with the lock before it finally slid into place. Leaning my head against the cool, marble-patterned wall, I squeezed my eyes shut, but all I could see was the image from the decorative mirror in the hallway. Mark, my husband of 10 years, glancing around like a cornered animal before uncapping a tiny vial and tipping its contents into my glass. A fine white powder, almost invisible as it dissolved into the deep red liquid. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. My legs felt like they were made of cotton, and I sank onto the closed toilet lid, wrapping my arms around myself as a violent tremor racked my body. No, I didn't see that. I imagined it. My mind desperately tried to supply a rational explanation. A breath freshener? Some kind of joke? A prank? But the furtive way he moved, the tension in his shoulders, it wasn't a joke. My blood ran cold, a glacial tide of pure dread that extinguished the last embers of my disbelief. This was real. The panic was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest, but then something else began to surface through the waves of terror. A chilling, unnerving clarity. It was like pieces of a broken mirror suddenly snapping back together, forming a picture I hadn't allowed myself to see. His insistence on this specific restaurant, a place far beyond our usual anniversary splurges. "It's our 10th, Jess," he'd said, his smile a little too wide. "We have to do it right." The strange questions over the past few weeks, asked with a casualness that now seemed horrifyingly staged. "Feeling okay, honey? No headaches or anything?" And the phone calls, the secretive, whispered conversations I'd overheard from his home office, where he'd quickly slam his laptop shut if I walked in. I'd only caught snippets, phrases about a policy and waiting for the right time. I had convinced myself it was a surprise for me, and it was. Just not the kind I ever could have imagined. The man I loved, the man I'd built a life with, was a complete stranger, and he was trying to hurt me, or worse. Tears pricked my eyes, but I furiously wiped them away. Crying was a luxury I couldn't afford. What were my options? I could run back out there, scream, point my finger, and accuse him. I pictured it vividly. My own voice, shrill with terror, accusing Mark. And then the looks on his family's faces. Robert's dismissive scorn. Carol's condescending pity. And Chloe's triumphant, "I knew it all along," smirk as they labeled me hysterical, unstable. The scorned middle-class wife finally cracking under the pressure. Mark would play the part of the concerned, devastated husband to perfection. "My wife, she's been under so much strain lately," he would say, his voice full of false sympathy. I would be the crazy one, and he would have all the time in the world to try again. No, I couldn't let that happen. My gaze hardened, catching my own reflection in the shiny chrome of the toilet paper dispenser. My eyes, wide with fear, slowly narrowed with something else, something cold and sharp. For years, Chloe had made my life a quiet misery. She was the one who delighted in undermining me, who saw me as nothing more than a gold-digging art teacher who wasn't good enough for her precious brother. She had never missed an opportunity to deliver a backhanded compliment or a thinly veiled insult, each one a tiny paper cut to my soul. And a dark, terrible thought began to take root in the fertile ground of my desperation. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about a twisted, awful kind of justice. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I stood up. I splashed cold water on my face, straightened my dress, and practiced a smile in the mirror. It was a ghastly, brittle thing, but it would have to do. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I walked back to the table, each step feeling both impossibly heavy and terrifyingly light. Mark's head snapped up as I approached. His face broke into that wide, predatory smile I now saw for what it was. "There you are, honey," he said, his voice slick and smooth. He gestured toward my waiting glass. "You must be thirsty. Drink up." Those words, so simple and so innocent-sounding, were the final confirmation. They slammed into me with the force of a physical blow, and any lingering shred of doubt I had evaporated into pure, cold certainty. I gave him a weak smile and sat down, my hands trembling in my lap. I needed to wait for the right moment. The opportunity came about 5 minutes later. Mark had launched into a loud, boisterous conversation with his father about stock portfolios and market trends, their voices rising with arrogant confidence. On my other side, Chloe, ever the picture of bored superiority, was completely engrossed in her phone, her thumb flicking condescendingly across the screen as she scrolled. Her own glass, identical to mine, sat just inches away. This was it. My heart was pounding in my ears, so loud I was sure they could hear it. With a hand that I willed to be steady, I reached forward, as if to adjust the positioning of the salt shaker that sat between my glass and hers. "This thing is always in the way," I murmured to no one in particular. My fingers brushed the salt shaker, a perfect piece of misdirection. Then, in one swift, fluid motion that felt both impossibly fast and agonizingly slow, my other hand shot out. My fingers closed around the stem of her glass as my thumb and forefinger grabbed mine. I switched them. The base of each glass touched the white linen tablecloth with a soft, barely audible click. I pulled my hand back, my palm slick with sweat. No one had noticed. Mark and Robert were still arguing about dividends. Chloe hadn't even looked up from her phone. I was safe. The next 30 minutes were the longest of my entire life. I raised my new glass, her glass, to my lips, pretending to take delicate sips, the clean, crisp taste of the untainted liquid, a stark contrast to the poison I knew was in the other. I watched Chloe. She picked up her glass, my glass, and took a long drink, her expression unchanged. A few moments later, she took another. I was a tempest of warring emotions, a dizzying mix of raw terror, suffocating guilt, and a grim, cold-blooded satisfaction. "Ugh," Chloe suddenly said, putting her glass down with a slight frown. "This tastes a bit off. For a place with 3 Michelin stars, you'd think they could get the beverages right." I froze, my eyes darting to Mark. He glanced at the glass, a flicker of something. Annoyance, concern, crossing his face before he smoothed it over. "It's probably just a complex finish, Chloe. You're just not used to it," he said dismissively, turning back to his father. Chloe just rolled her eyes and, to my abject horror, picked up the glass and drained half of it in one long, defiant gulp. My stomach churned. A clock on the far wall, an elegant gilded monstrosity, seemed to mock me. I watched its long, slender minute hand crawl, second by agonizing second, toward the 30-minute mark. Every tick echoed the frantic, terrified beat of my own heart. I was watching, and I was waiting. Every tick of my watch was a hammer blow against my sanity. 28 minutes. 29. The air in the restaurant, once just chilly with my in-laws' disdain, now felt thick and heavy, like I was trying to breathe underwater. I picked at my seared scallops, which had long gone cold, pushing them around the plate with a fork that trembled in my hand. Across the table, Chloe, oblivious, had finished her second glass, my second glass. She'd complained after the first sip, a wrinkled nose and a sharp comment. "Mark, what is this stuff? It tastes dusty." Mark had just laughed it off. "It's a $90 bottle of Cabernet, Chloe. Maybe your palate is just used to cheaper things." The insult, meant for her, felt like it was directed at me. A grim smile touched my lips before I could stop it. Now Chloe was holding court, droning on about some corporate takeover her law firm was handling. Robert was listening with rapt attention, while Carol nodded along, her diamond necklace flashing under the low lights. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs, a frantic rhythm counting down to something I had set in motion, but couldn't truly comprehend. 30 minutes. The number flashed on my digital watch face. Now. It started subtly. Chloe was in the middle of a sentence, a triumphant little smirk on her face, when she just stopped. She blinked, her expression going blank for a second, as if she'd lost her train of thought. And so she frowned, touching her temple. "Wow, I totally just blanked. It must be getting late." "It's only 9:30, dear," Carol said, a hint of impatience in her voice. Chloe waved a dismissive hand, but the movement was slow, clumsy. "No, I just feel weirdly dizzy all of a sudden." She looked around the opulent dining room with its panoramic view of the sparkling Central Park Reservoir. "Is it hot in here?" Her face, usually a healthy, smug pink, was starting to lose its color. A pale, clammy sheen was spreading across her forehead. My own blood ran cold, a mix of terror and a terrible, dark vindication. "It's happening. I think I need some water," Chloe mumbled, and her voice was different, thicker. The crisp, cutting articulation she was so proud of was gone, replaced by a soft, fuzzy slur. "My throat feels tight." She brought a hand to her neck, her perfectly manicured fingers pressing against her skin. That's when the family's attention finally snapped to her, sharp and absolute. "Chloe, are you all right?" Robert asked, his booming voice laced with sudden concern. "I'm fine, Dad. She tried to stand, perhaps to get some air, but her legs seemed to buckle. She sank back into her chair, her breathing suddenly audible, short, sharp gasps, like she couldn't get enough air. Her eyes, wide and panicked, darted around the table. They met mine. In that one horrific second, I saw it all. The initial haze of confusion in her gaze sharpened into a dawning, absolute horror. It wasn't just physical pain, it was the chilling light of understanding. She didn't know how, but she knew who. Her eyes locked on mine, accusing, terrified, and pleading all at once. My creation, my desperate act of survival, was staring back at me from the face of my tormentor. Time seemed to stop. The clinking of distant glasses, the murmur of conversations, it all faded into a dull roar. There was only the silent, screaming question in her eyes. Then, with a final choked gasp, she slumped forward. Her body went limp, a dead weight against the crisp, white tablecloth. Her arms swept out, sending a cascade of heavy silverware and a crystal water goblet crashing to the floor. The sound shattered the restaurant's elegant quiet, like a gunshot. Carol let out a piercing shriek. "Chloe! Oh my God, Chloe!" Robert was on his feet, his face a mask of panic. "Somebody call 911! Get a doctor!" Waiters and busboys began rushing toward our table. Other diners were standing up, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. And through it all, I watched Mark. He had jumped to his feet with the rest of them. his face arranged in the perfect expression of shocked concern for his sister. He turned, his mouth open to shout something, but the sound that came out was not a word. It was a strangled, guttural cry of pure agony. His hands, which a moment ago were ready to play the part of the panicked brother, flew to his own chest, clutching at the fabric of his expensive suit jacket. The feigned panic on his face dissolved, replaced by a look of utter, stupefied betrayal. His eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at a point somewhere over my shoulder. He took a staggering step backward, his leg catching on the leg of his own chair. The heavy, dark wood chair toppled over with a loud crack, and Mark went down with it. He didn't try to catch himself, he just crashed to the floor, a 200-pound sack of finely dressed horror. He landed with a sickening final thud that seemed to echo even louder than Chloe's scattered silverware. The restaurant erupted. The previously controlled panic exploded into full-blown chaos. Screams echoed from multiple tables. A woman near us started sobbing. But I was frozen, rooted to my spot. My own half-eaten scallops a blurry mess in my vision. My mind was a blank slate of white noise. Chloe. That was me. That was my desperate, terrible choice. But Mark? I stared at his crumpled form on the floor, then at Chloe's, then back to Mark. I never touched his glass. I never went near his plate. His water was untouched. It made no sense. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't the grim justice I had orchestrated. This was something else, something new and terrifying and completely, devastatingly out of my control. Chloe's collapse was my doing, a monstrous act of self-preservation. But Mark's? It was an impossibility. The world dissolved into a smear of flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the restaurant's pristine glass walls. One moment, I was staring at the impossible sight of my husband and his sister on the floor. The next, the air was thick with the frantic energy of strangers. The clatter of medical kits, the sharp, authoritative voices of paramedics, the distant wail of sirens growing closer. It was a kaleidoscope of chaos, and I was pinned to its center, unable to move, unable to breathe. My mind was a blank, static-filled screen, replaying the last 30 seconds on a loop. Chloe's collapse, which I had caused, and Mark's, which I had not. A firm but gentle hand fell on my shoulder. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." I turned to see a woman in an NYPD detective's uniform, her face calm and unreadable. She wasn't looking at me like a victim. She was looking at me like a puzzle piece she needed to place. She guided me away from the table, away from the frantic efforts to save Mark and Chloe, away from the terrified, accusing eyes of my mother-in-law, Carol. They put me at a small table near the bar, a sad little island in the sea of activity. My shock was wearing off, replaced by a crystalline, terrifying alertness. The detective, whose nameplate read Diaz, sat across from me. "I'm Detective Diaz," she said, her voice even. "Can you tell me your name?" "Jessica. Jessica Miller." My voice was a thin, reedy thing I didn't recognize. "Okay, Jessica. I know this is a nightmare, but I need you to walk me through what happened. From the beginning. This was it, the performance of my life." I buried my face in my hands, summoning real tears that came surprisingly easy. They were tears of terror, confusion, and a strange, hollow grief. I was the traumatized wife. I was the innocent bystander. "It was our anniversary," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Our 10th anniversary. We were having dinner. Everything was perfect. Mark, he gave me this beautiful necklace. I instinctively touched the cold diamonds at my throat. We were celebrating. Robert and Carol were there, and Chloe," I let my voice trail off, letting the implication of my fraught relationship with Chloe hang in the air for her to interpret. "We were just talking," I continued, looking up at her with what I hoped were wide, pleading eyes. "Chloe," she started slurring her words, said she felt dizzy, and then she fell. "And Mark, he jumped up to help her and he just grabbed his chest and fell too. I don't understand, it happened so fast." I stuck to the script. I was the wife. My husband had just collapsed in front of me. Of course, I was a mess. Of course, I was clueless. Every fiber of my being screamed to tell them what Mark had done, to show them the proof of his monstrous betrayal. But a cold, calculating part of my brain, the part that had switched those glasses, held me back. They would never believe me. The hysterical wife, jealous of her sister-in-law, pointing fingers at her perfect husband. I'd be their #1 person of interest in a heartbeat. Detective Diaz just nodded, taking notes, her expression giving nothing away. An officer approached and spoke to her in a low murmur. I strained to hear, catching fragments. Paramedics got a preliminary read, the sister, Chloe. Her symptoms are consistent with some kind of fast-acting neuro agent. Really aggressive stuff. My blood turned to ice. Neuro agent. I had given that to Chloe. The horrible reality of what I had done, even in self-defense, washed over me. I felt sick. But then the officer continued, and his next words made the floor drop out from under me. But the husband, Mark, that's the weird part. His presentation is totally different. The EMTs are saying it looks like a massive cardiac event, but triggered by a powerful chemical agent, something designed to stop the heart. And here's the thing, Diaz, based on the onset and his metabolic signs, they think he must have ingested it earlier, maybe 30, 45 minutes before he collapsed. It wasn't in that beverage he was drinking at the end. I stared blankly at the polished mahogany of the bar. It felt like my brain had short-circuited. Earlier, a different substance. All the air left my lungs. I had watched Mark. I had watched him like a hawk from the moment I returned from the restroom. He hadn't eaten or had anything else. He only drank from his own glass, the one I had switched with Chloe's. The glass I thought was safe, but it wasn't. It was never about my glass. The chaos of the restaurant faded into a dull hum. The flashing lights, the panicked voices, they were all a movie playing in another room. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit quiet of a small room at the 19th precinct hours later, the pieces didn't just click into place, they slammed together with the force of a car crash. I sat on a hard plastic chair, a lukewarm cup of water untouched in front of me. Detective Diaz had been questioning me for what felt like an eternity, circling the same facts, looking for a crack in my story. But my mind was elsewhere. It was back at the dinner table, replaying the night not through the lens of my own fear, but through the chilling new knowledge I possessed. Chloe didn't just hate me. The venom she reserved for me was just practice. Her true, deep-seated animosity, the kind that festers for a lifetime between siblings vying for power and parental approval in a family like the Millers. That was for Mark. She didn't want to just beat him in the corporate world or win their parents' favor. She wanted him gone. She must have had her own plan, all along, a plan that had nothing to do with me. Ingested earlier. When? How? My mind raced, grabbing at foggy details. Chloe arriving a few minutes before me and Mark, her insisting on pouring the first round of water for everyone from the pitcher on the table. Her overly friendly gesture felt odd even then. Was that it? Had she put something in Mark's water, knowing he always drank it throughout the meal? Mark's plan was to eliminate me. Chloe's plan was to eliminate Mark. I was never a player in this sick game. I was a pawn. My husband was going to use a fast-acting agent on me, and his sister had already dosed him with a slow-acting one. They were a viper's nest, coiled together in a death spiral of greed and hatred. And I, by sheer dumb terrified luck, had become the instrument of fate. My desperate act of survival hadn't just saved my own life, it had inadvertently sprung Chloe's trap and exposed Mark's, all at the same horrific, spectacular moment. The terrible realization settled in my gut like a block of lead. I was caught in the crossfire of a war I never even knew was being fought. The harsh, antiseptic smell of the hospital is what I remember most. It was a smell that promised clean slates and new beginnings, but all it did was scour away the last vestiges of the life I thought I had. Hours after the chaos at the restaurant, a doctor with tired eyes and a kind, grim face sat across from me in a small, windowless family room. He spoke in low, measured tones. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Collins. We did everything we could. Your husband, Mark, didn't make it." The words didn't land with the gut-wrenching grief I once would have imagined. Instead, a hollow, echoing void opened up inside me. Mark was gone. The man who had tried to end my life was dead. I felt a tremor of something cold and sharp, but it wasn't sadness. It was the chilling finality of it all. "And his sister?" I asked, my voice a dry whisper. "Chloe is alive," the doctor said, pausing. "She's been stabilized, but the substance she ingested caused significant neurological effects. It's too soon to know the full extent of the damage, but she will have a long road ahead. She's currently in police custody here at the hospital." Under arrest. The word hung in the sterile air. And just like that, I was no longer a wife, but a widow. I was no longer a sister-in-law, but the woman whose place a would-be killer had taken. The hours that followed were a blur of more questions from the NYPD detective. I played my role to perfection, the shell-shocked wife struggling to process an anniversary dinner turned into a nightmare. They were gentle but firm, their questions circling the obvious. I was the one with motive. I was the one Chloe had a notoriously bad relationship with. But I had an ace up my sleeve. "The mirrors," I said, my voice finally finding some strength. "The restaurant. It's one of those places covered in decorative mirrors and polished surfaces. And security cameras. There must be cameras." I looked the detective straight in the eye. "You need to get the security footage, please. It will show you everything." A few days later, I was sitting in a viewing room at the precinct, the detective beside me. The screen flickered to life, showing our table from a high-angle, black and white perspective. My heart hammered against my ribs. I watched myself get up and walk away, and then I saw it, just as I had in the mirror. Mark, my husband, looking around like a cornered animal before pulling that tiny vial from his pocket. I saw him tip the contents into my glass. The detective let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. The footage continued. It showed my return, my forced smile, Mark's predatory grin as he pushed the glass toward me. I watched my own hand, a stranger's hand, tremble slightly as it reached for the salt shaker. I saw the swift, almost imperceptible switch. A masterpiece of desperate choreography. I had to look away for a second, a wave of nausea washing over me. But the detective wasn't done. "Wait," he said, rewinding the footage to before I'd even gone to the restroom. "Look at this, your sister-in-law." On the screen, Chloe was creating a minor fuss, flagging down a passing waiter about her appetizer being cold. Mark and his parents were distracted, looking toward the waiter, and in that split second, the camera caught it, a subtle, fluid movement. Chloe's hand, holding a small dropper, hovered over Mark's water pitcher on the table. A few drops fell, invisible to the naked eye. She then resumed her complaint to the waiter without missing a beat. My blood ran cold for the second time in a week. It wasn't just one plot. It was two. With the footage, the entire narrative shifted. The district attorney's office painted me as the tragic heroine, a victim who, in a brilliant act of self-preservation, had unknowingly exposed a much darker plot. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. Chloe, awake but impaired and facing a mountain of evidence, was charged with Mark's murder. The story was neat, tidy, and made me look like an innocent pawn. Only I knew the truth. My choice wasn't about exposing a plot. It was about serving a cold dish of my own bitter justice to the woman who had tormented me for a decade. Weeks later, the Soho loft felt like a museum of a life that was never really mine. The panoramic views of the city no longer inspired me. They mocked me. The air was thick with the scent of cardboard and packing tape. I was sorting through Mark's office, a space I'd rarely entered, when I found the folder. It was tucked away in his bottom desk drawer. Inside were bank statements from accounts I didn't even know he had. The numbers were horrifying. Accounts I believed were healthy were nearly empty. There were documents detailing a series of high-risk ventures that had completely collapsed, resulting in staggering financial losses. He hadn't just been in trouble, he was facing complete and utter ruin. And beneath those papers was the final exhibit, a life insurance policy. My name was printed in cold black ink as the insured party. The beneficiary was Mark. The payout? $5 million. I sank to the floor, the glossy paper crinkling in my hand. He hadn't just wanted to get rid of me. He wanted to get rich off of me. It was the ultimate betrayal, the final, ugliest truth. Just then, my phone buzzed on the desk, the vibration unnaturally loud in the silent apartment. It was the detective. "Jessica, I know this is a bad time," he started, his voice professional but not unkind. "But we recovered something you need to know about. We managed to pull text messages from Mark and Chloe's phones from the weeks leading up to that night." I held my breath. "It wasn't two separate plans," he said, and I could almost hear him shaking his head on the other end of the line. "Not at first. They were in it together. The initial plan was for both of them to get you out of the picture. They were going to split the $5 million insurance payout. But the messages show they started turning on each other. Accusations, paranoia. Chloe got greedy. She thought Mark would cheat her out of her share, so she decided to take him out and pin it all on you, still expecting the insurance to pay out to his estate, which she, as next of kin, would control. The phone felt slick in my palm, the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle slotted into place. I wasn't a pawn caught between two warring siblings. I was the prize. I was the lamb they had both planned to lead to the slaughter before their own venom turned them against each other. "Jessica, are you still there?" the detective asked. "Yes," I said, my voice hollow. "Thank you for letting me know." I hung up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the endless labyrinth of New York City. I had no husband. Mark's financial ruin meant there was no real inheritance, only problems. My relationship with his parents was shattered beyond any hope of repair. I had nothing left of the life I had spent 10 years building. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows between the skyscrapers, I realized I had the one thing neither Mark nor Chloe ever intended for me to keep. I had my life. I took a deep, ragged breath, the first true breath of a free, albeit deeply scarred, woman.